welcome to Read Aloud number 9, chapter 8, Exploration. So remember, she pasted all the crazy instructions that she found on a piece of paper. Let me see if I can find the message. I'll remind you what it looked like. I don't know if that's backwards. No, it's not upside down. Yeah, so that's what it kind of looked like. And she decides she's going to have Doon look at it because they have the day off the next day. She's going to go find Doon. So this is called Explorations, Chapter 8. Doon had taken to wander in the pipeworks alone. He would go to his assigned tunnel and do his job quickly. Once he got good at using the wrenches and brushes and tubes of glue, it wasn't hard. Most of the workers did their job quickly, then gathered in little groups to play cards or have salamander races or just talk and sleep. But Doon didn't care about any of that. If he was going to be stuck in the pipeworks, he would at least not waste time he had. Since a long blackout, everything seemed more urgent than ever. Whenever the lights flickered, he was afraid the ancient generator might be shuddering to a permanent halt. So while the others lounged around, he headed out toward the edges of the pipeworks to see what he could see. Pay attention, his father had said. And that's what he did. He followed his map when he could, but in some places the map was unclear. There were even tunnels that didn't show up on the map at all. To keep from getting lost, he dropped a trail of things as he walked, washers, bolts, pieces of wire, whatever he had in his tool belt, and then he picked them up on his way back. His father had been at least a little bit right. There were interesting things in the pipeworks if he paid attention. Already he found 3 new crawling creatures, a black beetle the size of a pinhead, a moth with furry wings, and best of all, a creature with a soft, shiny body and a small spiral-patterned shell on its back. Just after he found this one, while he was sitting on the floor watching in fascination as the creature cupped up his arm, a couple workers came by and saw him. They burst into laughter. "It's Bug Boy," one of them said. "He's collecting bugs for his lunch." Enraged, Doon jumped up and shouted at them. His sudden motion made the creature fall off his arm to the ground, and Doon felt a crunch beneath his foot. The laughing workers didn't notice. They tossed a few more taunts at him and walked on. But Doon knew instantly what he had done. He lifted his foot and looked at the squashed mess underneath. Unintended consequences, he thought miserably. He was angry at his anger, the way it surged up and took over. He picked the bits of shell and goo off the sole of his boot and thought, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you." In the days that followed, Doon went farther and farther into the pipeworks, holding on to the hope that he might find something not only interesting, but important. But what he found didn't seem important at all. Once he came upon an old pair of pliers that someone had dropped and left behind. Twice he found a coin. He discovered a supply closet that appeared to have been completely forgotten, but all it had were some boxes of plugs and washers and rusty box containing shriveled bits of what must once have been someone's lunch. He found another supply closet at the far south end of the pipeworks. At least he assumed that's what it was. It was at the end of the tunnel with a rope strung across it. A sign hanging from the rope said, "Caved in, no entry." Doon entered anyway, ducking under the rope. He found no sign of a cave-in, but there were no lights. He groped his way forward for 20 steps or so, and the tunnel ended in a securely locked door. He couldn't see it, but he felt it. He retraced his steps, ducked back under the rope again, and walked on. A short distance away, he found a hatch in the ceiling of the tunnel, a square wooden panel that must lead, he thought, up into the storerooms. If he had something to stand on, he could have reached it and tried to open it, but it was about a foot above his upstretched hand. Probably it was locked anyhow. He wondered if the builders had used openings like this one during the construction of the city to get more easily from one place to another. On days when his job was near the main tunnel, he sometimes walked along the river after he'd finished working. He stayed away from the east end where the generator was. He didn't want to think about the generator. Instead, he went the other way, toward the place where the river rushed out of the pipeworks. The path grew less level at this end and less smooth. The river here was bordered with clumps of wrinkled rock that seemed to grow out of the ground like fungus. Doon liked to sit on these clumps, running his fingers along the strange creases and crevices that must have been carved somehow by running or dripping water. In some places there were grooves that looked almost like writing, but as for something important, Doon found none. It seemed that the pipeworks was no use, after all, to a person who wanted to save the city. The generator was hopeless. He would never understand electricity. He used to think he could use electricity to invent a movable light. He studied hard enough. He took apart the light bulbs. He took apart the electric outlets on the wall to see how the wires inside wound together, and in the process got a painful vibrating jolt all through his body. But when he tried to wind wires of his own together in exactly the same way, nothing happened. It was what came through the wires that made the light, he finally understood. He had no idea what that was. Now he could see only 2 courses of action. He could give up and do nothing, or he could start to work on a different kind of movable light. Doon didn't want to give up, so on his days off, one Thursday, he went to the Ember library to look up fire. The library occupied an entire building on one side of Bilbo Square. Its door was at the end of a short passage in the middle of a building. Doon went down the passage, pushed open the door, and walked in. No one was there except for the librarian, ancient Edward Pocket, who sat behind his desk writing something with a tiny pencil clutched in his gnarled hand. The library had 2 big rooms, one for fiction, which was stories people made up out of their imaginations, and the other for fact, which was information about the real world. The walls of both rooms were lined with shelves, and on most of the shelves were hundreds of packets of pages. Each packet was held together with a astute loop of string. The packets leaned against each other at angles and lay untidily in stacks. Some were thick and some were slim, that only a clip was needed to hold them together. The pages of the oldest packets were yellowed and warped, and all their edges were uneven rolls of ripples. These were the books of Ember, written over years by citizens. They contained in their close writings much that was imagined and everything that was known. Edward Pocket looked up and nodded briefly at Doon, one of his most frequent visitors. Doon nodded back. He went into the fact room, to the section of shelves labeled F. The books were arranged by subject, but even so, it wasn't easy to find what you wanted. A book about moths, for instance, might be under moths, or I for insects, or B for bugs. It might be under F for flying things. Usually you had to browse through the entire library to make sure you'd found all the books on one subject, but since he was looking for fire, he thought it might, well, start with F. Fire was rare in Ember. When there was a fire, it was because there had been an accident. Someone had left dish towel too close to the electric burner or a stove, or a cord had frayed and sparked and flown up and ignited curtains. Then the citizens would rush with buckets of water, and the fire was quickly drowned. But it was, of course, possible to start a fire on purpose. You could hold a sliver of wood onto the stove burner until it burst into flames. And then for a moment, it would flare brightly, giving off orange light. The trick was to find a way to make the light last. If you had a light and that would keep going, you could go into the unknown region and see what was there. Finding a way to explore the unknown regions was the only thing Doon could think of. He took down a book from the F shelf, Fungus, it was called. He put it back. The next was called How to Repair Furniture. He put that back too. He went through foot disease, fun with strings, coping with failure, canned fruit recipes before he finally found the book, all about fire. He sat down at one of the library square tables to read it. But the person who had written the book knew no more about fire than Doon. Mostly the book described the dangers of fire. A long section was about building in Winford Square that had caught fire 40 years ago. Now all its doors and all its furniture had burned up and smoke had filled the air for days. Another part was about what to do if your oven caught fire. Doon closed the book and sighed. It was useless. He could write a better book than that. He got up and wandered restlessly around the library. Sometimes you could find useful things just by choosing randomly from the shelves. He had done this many times. Just reached out and grabbed something, and hoped by accident he might come upon the very piece of information he needed. It would be something that another person had written down without understanding its significance, just a sentence or two. That would be like a flash of light in Doon's mind, fitting together with things he'd already knew to make a solution to everything. Although he'd often found something interesting in these searches, he'd never found anything important. Today was no different. He did come across a collection called Mysterious Words from the Past, which he read for a while. It was about word phrases so old that the meanings had been forgotten. He read a few pages. Heavens above indicates surprise. What heaven means is unclear. It might have been another word for floodlight. Hogwash means nonsense, though no one knows what a hog is or why one would wash it. Batting 1,000 indicates great success. This might possibly refer to killing bugs. All in the same boat means all in the same predicament. The meaning of boat is unknown. Interesting but not useful. He put the book back on the shelf and was about to leave when the door of the library opened and Lena Mayfleet came running in.